So we're going to get set up for our next presenter, who's dedicated to collaboration and finding a shared language, shared vision, shared values for a school community. This doesn't just mean teachers. This means parents. This means districts. This means everybody, right? Like Ted, a frequent visitor of North Dakota, be making this is his third trip here in just 18 months. Please help me in joining and welcoming the founder of the Partnership for 21st Century Skills and the CEO of EdLeader 21, Ken Kay.
Whoa, what a good entrance. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. I think Ted just did a pretty good job a moment ago of explaining my role, which is that Ted and I have been on the road a lot together. We've done a week in Virginia. We've done Reno, Nevada. And when he called me and said, I want you to come to North Dakota, I said I'd be thrilled. And as you'll hear later, some of the districts that are involved in EdLeader 21, the group that I've been running the last 6 years, a couple of districts in Fargo, West Fargo, and then Moorhead, Minnesota, are doing some of the best work in the country around the work that I'm about to describe. So you'll hear about that. So I'm excited to be back in this state. I wanted to start a conversation about what might be the next step that you take, right? So the film is inspiring. This panel was inspiring. You could have this panel in your district, and it would be a good idea. But, okay, well, when you got people motivated, what are you going to do? And what I've been working on for the last 15 years is trying to get districts and communities to say, if you don't define the direction you want to go in, all the change you want to motivate is going to be scattered, and it isn't going to head you in a purposeful, clear direction. So here's a slide that, just to get us started, this is a slide I want you to look at, was put together by HR directors from some of the largest companies in the world, and they were asked a simple question in a poll. By 2020, what are the most important competencies the employees of your companies will need? Okay? So now I want you to turn to a member, to a partner, to a participant, a neighbor is what I meant, and chat about this list of 10. Do you think it's a good list for North Dakota? And secondly, are these important competencies that your district should be focused on? So go ahead and start. Pick somebody to chat with. Does this list look right to you in terms of what your kids need for 21st century success? Go ahead. Okay? All right. Obviously, there was no interest in this question. Okay. We may come back to this with our panel. Now I'm going to show you a similar list, a shorter list. And this is a tool that I use, and I'll make sure that these slides are available to everybody through the summit. But I'm going to ask you sort of a similar set of questions now. Look over at student A and student B. How many of you would say that you went to K through 12 education under the student A model? Raise your hand. Look at that. Okay. Now you're an employer, and I want you to look at student A versus student B. Who would you hire? Student A or student B? B. Close call? Okay. You're interested in civic engagement and civic participation and being a good citizen. What would make the better citizen, student A or student B? Okay. And lastly, which of these two students is going to do better in their personal challenges? Family challenges, financial challenges, health challenges, A or B? Okay. So those were pretty rhetorical questions. Here's a serious question I need your help with. Why does everybody, everywhere I go, want student B, and we're still stuck in the student A model? Why? Sorry? Momentum? What momentum? Or what else? Pardon? I got to hear you one at a time. Come on. Okay. So one is, student B is measurable, but it's harder to measure, right? What else? Policy. Policy is all on the student A side, right? State tests, state policies are all over on the student A side. What else? Standards. Standards are student A standards. What else?
Steps are hard to change.
Yes, yes. Change is tough, right? Our principal at the beginning of the day said change is difficult. What else? There's something else going on here, right? Fear, good. But here's the thing. What system did our parents go to school under? All right, what about our teachers? Where are the colleges of education prepping the next generation of teachers? Student A mostly. All right, you got a student B College of Education, you're lucky. Okay. So what I want you to do the rest of the day, I think this is easy nomenclature, is the work that I've been doing now for 15 years, and the work I want you to take on, thinking about Ted's inspirational work. Concretely, how do we move from the student A to the student B model? And how does that happen? And what I would say is you actually have to define student B for your district. You've actually got to articulate a specific student B before you start changing pedagogy, before you start changing culture. You actually have to have a direction. How many of you would say that your district has created a vision for student B? Okay, so there are 10 or 15 hands. That's good. Okay. So what the profile of a graduate is that I've been working on, and the tools and resources that I'm going to briefly explain to you, they're really your ability as a local school district and your community to create your version of student B. A profile of a graduate is your version, your localized version of student B. So we've created a website, profileofagraduate.org, and I'm going to give you a homework assignment. Today, today's Thursday, right? By the end of the weekend, I want all of you to have gone to this site and created your own profile of a graduate. There are 40, 50 skills to choose from. You choose your own background. And then when you identify yourself as a teacher, as an administrator, as a school board member, as a parent, as a business leader, it'll then give you suggestions on what to do with your profile of a graduate. Who do you take it to? If I'm a student, I take it to my teacher. If I'm a teacher, I take it to my principal. If I'm a principal, I take it to my superintendent and raise with them the possibility. I did this profile of a graduate personally this weekend, you say, but we should have a profile of a graduate for our district. Otherwise, we won't have a North Star for the work of our district. So I want to tell you a couple stories that will help you see what this can do. Because people go, well, is a profile of a graduate a whole new initiative in education? And the answer is no. It's the articulation of what direction you're headed in for all the other transformation you're doing. So I was with a district in Colorado a couple of months ago, and they asked me to come out, and they said, Ken, we have these 6 transformation efforts underway, and we want you to hear from them. So we've invited the chair and vice chair of each of these 6 task forces to come and present to you for 15 or 20 minutes. There was one on one-to-one computing. There was one on CTE, career and technical education. There was one on success skills for curriculum. There was one on capstone projects. There was one on portfolio projects. You get the idea. There were 6 of these. At the end, I listened for 2 hours, and I said to them, what are the competencies that these are all anchored in? When you're doing a one-to-one computing initiative, are you just doing a one-to-one computing initiative, or have you identified the competencies you want the one-to-one computing initiative to actually lead to? And they said, well, each of the 6 task forces is defining their own set of competencies. And I looked at them. I don't know if I turned pale or if I grimaced. They knew that I wasn't happy. And one of the principals gets up and goes, I'm going to read you the vision and mission statement of our district. And all of the 6 transformation working groups are tied to the vision and mission statement of the district. And he did. He read them. And I said, I hope it's not disrespectful, but your vision and mission statement is the equivalent of saying that you're dedicated to space exploration without having identified what planet you're going to. The profile of a graduate is a common identification of a planet that says we're all headed in the same direction because we want every student to be a creative problem solver, a good collaborator, a good communicator, entrepreneurial, global citizen, whatever it is you put on your local district list. So I think that this profile of a graduate can be a terrific North Star to anchor all the other activities that you're taking on in the name of innovation and transformation. The other message that I want to leave you, and this is really an important one, is that this is not a cookie-cutter process where you just take, some of you know the 4 C's, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. We don't want you to just adopt the 4 C's. We don't want you to adopt somebody else's model. We want you to customize it. So another story I want to mention is I was in Springfield, Missouri. Superintendent calls me and says, Ken, we want you to come and meet with 400 parents, and we're going to have a community conversation about the 4 C's. And I said, great. He says, but I want to tell you something. In our community, we only focus on 3 of the C's. I said, okay, but are you going to tell me which one ahead of time, or am I going to guess during the? They said, well, actually, we're a little bit, we don't like creativity very much. That's all right. It's okay. It was in Missouri. It's okay. And then he says to me, while we're at it, please don't bring up global citizenship. I said, okay, but could you tell me more about that? And he goes, well, in our community, if you're globally oriented, you put the interests of the world ahead of the interests of the United States. So we don't like that term. We'd rather focus on citizenship. So fast forward, and I now want to show you a few of these profiles of a graduate from around the country. I get to Fairfax County, Virginia, which some of you may know, 185,000 students outside of DC. And they put together this profile of a graduate over many months. And the first draft of their had in the middle column the term citizen. And by the way, the right column had the term self-reliant. And I told them that when they came back from their community engagement conversations to let me know if there were problems with the first draft. So this two groups came right up to me at the beginning of the second meeting and said, Ken, we got problems. Our group represents the cultural diversity of this district. There are 204 languages in our district. And people don't like the term citizen. And because they think literally they have to be a citizen of the US, and we don't want them to think that. And I said, well, what term do you have in mind? And they said, well, we would like global citizen. And I said, great, but just don't move to Springfield, Missouri. So the other group came up to me and said, I said, why don't you like self-reliant? They said, we represent the special needs kids of the district, and we don't think our kids are going to be self-reliant. That's the wrong aspiration. I said, what do you guys think? And they said, well, we think they can be goal-directed and resilient. And that's how we got to that. The point that I want to make with you is as you take on this profile of a graduate, you got to deal with the nuances of your own community. You know, Perry, who's going to come up and represent the business community in a few minutes, said to us when we were doing prep, he said, you know, the needs of the energy areas within North Dakota are not the same as the needs of the agricultural areas of North Dakota. And so that's really a good example that this should get customized, and I'm totally supportive of that. This is a district outside of Phoenix, Arizona. These are their components of profile of a graduate. This is a district on the East Coast, Virginia Beach. This is the Catherine Smith School. This is an individual elementary school in San Jose, California. I love this one because this poster is in every classroom in their school. And when you walk in, the kindergartners and the first graders actually can point to each of the icons and tell you what they're aspiring to do. It's very, very, very powerful. The other thing that's not cookie cutter is the process. The Virginia Beach district actually had 1,000 community members meet in this convention center to ratify the profile of a graduate that I just showed you. Most districts have advisory groups of 35, 45, 85 people working on recommending a profile of a graduate as an advisory board to the Board of Education, to the school board. So how many superintendents and senior district leaders do we have in the room? Okay, so you have a second homework assignment, which is over the weekend when you go to the site, profileofgraduate.org, this implementation guide is 22 pages of suggestions on how to create a community dialogue around profile of a graduate. Not everybody in the room needs to get in this detail. You're welcome to it. But those districts that think it will be beneficial to have this discussion with their community, this is a guide of best practices on how to do that. So the one risk we run in talking about a profile of a graduate is that people will think, oh, well, we have a profile of a graduate, the work is done. It is not done. That is just the beginning of the process. So in our work within Ed Leader 21, we have created a 7-step process of change, and I've just been discussing with you steps 1 and 2. Adopt a vision, profile of a graduate, and create a community consensus around that vision. But how you align your system, how you build professional capacity of your teachers, how you focus your curriculum and assessment, how you support your teachers, and how you create a culture of continuous improvement, that's the journey that you begin after you've adopted your profile of a graduate. And they don't have to be sequenced. You can start some of these steps while you're putting your profile of a graduate together. But I want to make it clear that there's a long journey afterwards and a long-term commitment, but the profile of a graduate is a wonderful starting point. The other thing that we find, this is an icon from the web about finding friends, but what we have found in our work is that what's very, very powerful is districts who are undertaking this journey to do it together. And I want to tell you about one last very powerful story I alluded to. The best regional cooperation around this work in the country is going on in North Dakota and Minnesota. Let me say that again. The best regional cooperation in the country are those, you can see those pins in eastern North Dakota and western Minnesota. Fargo, West Fargo, and Moorhead, Minnesota have been working for 3 or 4 years on collaboratively moving the 4 Cs forward in their district. And we'll hear about that a little bit on the panel, both the highs and the lows of that. But what I want to say to you is, you have examples of districts that have committed to this journey already in North Dakota. You're not starting with 0, thankfully. But so that regional cooperation is one you might want to emulate. Those of you in other areas may want to cooperate as districts. And also, you may want to ask Fargo and West Fargo to host you. And they have the 90 administrators from those 3 districts meet jointly quarterly to move forward this work in ways of discussions of definitions, discussions of professional development work, work on technology. It's very, very exciting. And as Ted said, I mean, he and I believe in showcasing the best practices around the country, and you have them here in the state already. And you should be proud of them. I don't think you've adequately showcased their work. And I hope the next time you do a summit like this, maybe you'll do it in Fargo and in Fargo and West Fargo, and maybe you'll allow those districts to showcase their 4-year journey of this work. But the other thing I want to say is we now have almost 200 members in 32 states doing this work. And what some of our superintendents tell us, it's lonely work, but they want to be in a network, a professional learning community of others who are dedicated to the same journey. So another reason I came, obviously, is if there are districts in the audience that want to talk more, we're going to have a small table at lunch. And if you're a superintendent or a deputy superintendent that thinks this work is one you want to be part of, we'd love to talk to you more about the work of Ed Leader 21. So I want to end my piece of this by saying the way I think about the challenge in front of us is to commit to a journey from the student A model to the student B model. I hope that most districts in North Dakota will understand, and I think Ted's done as good a job as anybody in America in making people understand that the student A model is broken. The student A model is not producing students for 21st century work and life and citizenship. And what we need is an inspired state and people with an innovative spirit and people willing to do the hard work of committing to this transition from student A to student B. We don't want student B to be uniform in North Dakota. We don't want student B to be one set of skills for every district in North Dakota. But once each of you decides what your version of student B is, you'll be amazed at 2 things. One, it'll give you a set of new, innovative objectives to share with each other about. All of you will be headed roughly in the same direction, which will be powerful, but customized for your own community. And secondly, each of you will find back in your own districts that if you identify student B, if you create a profile of a graduate, that you will actually be creating a vision, a concrete vision for the transformation of education. Thank you very much.
Are we ready for the panelists?
Right. You want me to take a couple questions while we set up?
Absolutely.
So do we have, is there a question or 2 for me while we get our fabulous panel out? So there is one? Okay. We can get your mic on. All right, we'll get you another one. Is there somebody else who had a question in the front? All right, well, why don't you shout it to me and I'll repeat it.
My question was.
Now it's working. Go ahead.
Okay. My question is like, how do we leverage like the globalization that's going on, not just like all around the world? Because I'm from a refugee camp, and I never used a computer before I came here. I had to relearn that. And I talked to my cousin back there, and they said they have iPods in their schools. And this is a refugee camp, so I was like super surprised. And I've actually studied online with a teacher a student from London who was having trouble with math like I do too. So how do schools leverage globalization, not just like be constrained to like, hey, I go to West Fargo High School and that's my school?
Okay, the great question. So 2 ways I think this happens. One is that one of the issues for each district will be how important is global competence to your community. I have found, some of you know, I worked for a Montana senator, so I'm very familiar with this part of the country. And surprisingly, or surprisingly to people in other parts of the country, this part of the country is very, very sensitive and interested in international trade because of its natural resources. So there's actually a realization in this part of the country that international connections are important. But I'll leave that up to each of your communities to decide. But one of the ways that we'll get there is when communities say global competence and cultural understanding is important, that'll show up as one of the key things. And once that's there as a competence, then you've got to actually create, well, what does it mean to be culturally competent? What does it mean to be globally competent? It means to use the technology to be in touch with people and resources from all over the world. So I hope that most communities will create that. I also think, though, that, and this was said, you know, you can do this work. We emphasize doing this work in a non-technological context so that people won't go, well, we don't have the technology, so we can't do any of this. But the reality is that the technology enhances all of it, right? You can't be an effective collaborator in the 21st century without technology. You can't be an effective creative problem solver without technology. You can't be an effective communicator without knowing how to use the technology. So my hope is that as the communities here articulate their competencies that they think are important, that they will realize that technology plays a central role to each of those, and that they'll then be really understanding why they need the technology. We don't need the technology to be a tech district. We need a technology because we want our kids to be 21st century communicators, 21st century collaborators, and globally competent. And my hope is that once you've articulated that part of your student B vision, that will create the momentum to address the issues as you've so well articulated. What would you like? Are we ready for the panel?
Yeah, let's bring them out. So, would love to welcome to the stage to join Ken, Dr. Bob Gross from Fargo Public Schools. Mr. Perry Luber is the Vice President of Manufacturing for Trail King Industries. Susie Carlson, School Board Vice President, Northern Cass Public Schools. And last but certainly not least, Aiden Birch, a member of Superintendent Baszler's Student Cabinet from West Fargo Public Schools. Thanks so much, Aiden.
Great.
All right.
Can we put my slides back up? Because I think whether you can get to student A versus student B or whether you want me to go back to it, I'd like to have that slide up. There it is. Thank you. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for doing this. So I think that where we said we would start is, you know, I sort of said a lot of stuff. So I think one of the things I'd be interested in is just, do you have any general reactions to what I said, whether it applies to you or doesn't apply to you from your perspective? So we have a school district perspective, a corporate perspective, a board member perspective, and a student perspective, which is fantastic. So maybe we could go down the line and just see, do you have any thoughts about what I've said so far? And then I'll start after that with a question to Aiden.
Certainly. Well, I think as I listen to your presentation and I look at the difference between student A and student B, and then also the profile of a graduate that you articulated, I think what it does for me is it affirms the process that we in the Fargo Public Schools have gone through over the past few years to go back and revisit our own strategic plan, developing our own strategic initiatives, which include the 21st century skills. As I look at what's on that list for student B, on the top it does still say content mastery. So I think that is also something that's affirming to me, that as we do this, we need to be cognizant that we still talk about what is critical in the classroom, the content, knowledge, and skills, but then how do we wrap that into the learning and assessment of those other critical skills for our students?
Definitely from a business and industry perspective, Student B is what we're looking for out there. And as far as the profiles are concerned, we truly believe in that. And we believe in it on a regional basis. And we also believe that it's not only K through 12, but it's K through 16. Whatever those skill sets are that we've defined for the careers that exist in our state, we need to make sure that we're training our young people to be successful within those careers, and that profile's got to follow all of the way through their education.
So Perry, before you go on, I'd like to ask you a follow-up. Is this a controversial issue in the business community? Maybe you could tell people you're on several different statewide business groups. Could you let people know whether this is your view or whether you are really, or is this a controversial perspective, or do you think it's pretty widely accepted?
I think it's widely accepted. I don't think it's controversial at all.
Okay.
Recently participated in the Western Pathway Conference in Denver, Colorado, and it was very informative. And again, they were preaching that same thing, that you need to define the profiles and the skill sets necessary for kids to be successful today.
Great. Oh, you got one. Okay.
From a board perspective, I know at Northern Cass, we talk about a lot how.
Can you all hear? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. A little closer. We talk about all the time with our administration and our staff. They're very proactive, very innovative already in the things that they're doing. That we can't keep teaching the way it has been. We've been in that conversation for a few years now, actually, really. And everything, I guess, at Northern Cal that we do is very interconnected. From our inception of preschool to a middle school concept to compartmentalization of our elementary, and now our customized learning that we're kicking off this fall. It's continually grown, but while at the same time keeping the aspects of a student B in mind. We support the work and such that you're doing. I know that our staff and administration though did go through and, like you say, customize it to your own local district and such, and that they have done that just to create this buy-in, the overall vision. We've really created, to a degree, a culture of yes at Northern Cass. Of course, from a board perspective, we take a look, obviously, at what's being brought to us and such for input and approval and such, but there's really such a trust in there, and this isn't just something like with our customized learning this fall that we just all of a sudden started. It's been building for a few years based on these types of concepts. So I'll finish there, but yeah.
Hayden, any general reaction to what you heard so far?
Well, as a student hearing this, I think seeing that the content mastery is being combined with the critical thinking and the creativity is really, I suppose, it's good to hear. It's, in my district, being there the past couple of years and seeing all this slowly build and modernize, it's been kind of a strange experience seeing it come in piece by piece, but now that it's starting to finally get to the point where it's all gonna work together, it's kind of exciting. It's gonna be a interesting way to learn.
So, but you told me earlier, well, why don't I stay with you for a couple minutes? You told me earlier that actually when you think about the 4 C's, you wish right now they were more embedded. So maybe you could comment a little bit more on that.
Yes. I know the 4 C's, and that's right now, they haven't been implemented heavily enough. We're like, I know them, and I know what they're supposed to look like, but we haven't seen them in use yet. And I think that's what we need to have more of in my district.
So I asked you specifically earlier, Could you think of an example where that did happen that you were pleased with? And I think people might want to hear about something concrete that made a difference for you.
Yeah, so in a project this year that we did, it was cross-disciplinary. We did it in multiple classes. And I think that is one of the only projects we've ever done that I have really felt the 4 C's in use and seen them being used. It was a forensics project specifically. And so in science, we were learning DNA, and we were learning like writing alibis and writing defenses in language arts, and stuff like that. It's just being able to see that we're collaborating not only as students, but the teachers are between classes to allow us to, in the end, create our own presentation to explain the problem we were given.
So you want to see more of that?
Yes, I think like that project, more than just learning what the 4 C's were, really showed them in action.
Terrific. I guess one of the things, let's stick with the student B list for all 4 of you. It would be interesting, well, actually, let me make a comment about content, because this is a tension that a lot of you will find in your community. There's a lot of people that don't want to abandon the content because they're familiar with the student A model, and you're going to throw out all the content. There is a difference between having content mastery in student B and having all of the content over in student A, which is the assumption in the student B model is that you actually need content to do the other competence. You can't critically think about nothing, right? You all agree with that? But the trade-off is that you can't become a critical thinker and a problem solver if you're spending all your time memorizing. It's a different kind of learning experience. So I think that the content mastery needs to be there, but we need to stop obsessing about the amount of content and have the test that I think about is every student needs to master content to solve a problem. So they have to be able to demonstrate their ability to master the content they need to solve that problem, rather than master all the content of a discipline. And that's when people will go, well, I don't have to master all the content of a discipline because I have access to that content in a way that students, when I was growing up in the 50s, didn't have. So I just thought I would address that. So of the student B competencies, I want each of you to talk about which is the one that you really want people to focus on. Which is the one that you think maybe is going the best in your school district, and which is the one that is the hardest to do or the most unattended to. And Perry, from your perspective, you're the only one not tied to a specific district. I'd be interested in your perspective from a business community perspective, which of the 2 that you think are the most important from a business perspective? I think that would be helpful. Maybe you want to start, and then we could move this to...
It's very difficult for me to pick out just 2.
Oh, okay. Well, good. But then tell us how you respond to the list.
From a business perspective, I mean, critical thinking, the pace of change today is so fast and so overwhelming. We're in that digital age, and we have to train our young people how to assimilate and how to be change agents and to accept it. Communication skills, I mean, they're so important. I mean, and again, in this digital age, we get so wrapped up in our phones, texting, we forget how to talk to each other. We forget what touch means, and we really got to promote that and ensure that our young people have that ability to communicate and interact in a group setting, to be able to collaborate. It's so important. Our engineers, we want them out on the shop floor. We want them understanding how those people on the shop floor have to assemble the product they design. From an ergonomic perspective, again, that collaboration, how do they assemble it? They have to stand on their head to do it. And again, working from a creativity perspective, doing things differently than we did yesterday. So for me, all 4 are very, very important.
Okay, cool. So maybe we could talk from the school's perspective, which is the one that's coming along the best, and which is the one that's the hardest to do, or the one that's getting unattended to from each of your perspectives would be interesting.
Well, I like the answer that you just gave, because I would agree that it's very difficult to say one is more critical than the other. I think as we look at what is on that list, In our own district, collaboration is one that we are certainly trying to emphasize because we know that in the real world, in the opportunities that students might have, they're not going to be an individual silo. They need to be able to work with their peers. They need to be able to play their part in a job or in a role. So I think that's critically important. But then I think critical thinking is another one that rises to the top of my list because yes, the information is available on the phone or on the computer, but unless you can critically analyze it to say, is this true, is this valid, I may be going off on the wrong tangent with incorrect information. So I think that critical thinking component is a must as well.
Gosh, to really echo that and to piggyback on that, collaboration is the one that came to the forefront for me as well.
Came to the forefront, meaning that the district is moving along with it?
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
But let me ask that, is that true? Because when I talk to most districts around the country, the collaboration's going very well in K through 5 and okay in middle school and not so much in high school. That kids don't do as much collaboration in high school as they need to be doing. Is that, you're saying you think it's K through 12?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay.
I do. I think just with the different form, like the professional development and the focus that our staff and administration has on that and has put on that. But then right there equal with it is that the critical thinking. I've had one graduate and I have one that's going to be a senior. And I hear them. I hear them talking the language that I'm hearing from at board meetings and community meetings from our staff and our superintendent and such. So when you start hearing the kids, we have many of our extracurricular groups and things will come in the first few minutes of a board meeting. They will share the things that they're doing, different projects they're working on, and the vocabulary of these kids in elementary is amazing. It's awesome. It just so that piece is being communicated as far as just what is expected of them and back to collaborating. I believe that it is throughout our whole school.
So Aiden, which one's going the best and which one's not so much?
I think the one that's definitely going the best in my district specifically is critical thinking. Is that we are given this information and we have to analyze it. We have to cite sources and understand where the information comes from and what it means.
Okay.
I think that one is definitely going the best. As for ones that are not going as well, I'd probably say creativity.
Okay.
Because like we're told we can be creative, but it's not really, it's like, oh, be creative on this, but not really giving examples or allowing for creativity. Because you can tell a project was supposed to be done a certain way, but then just being like, oh, be creative about it makes it, rather than making it easier to be creative or having that be more open, it's like jumping through extra hoops just to do it in a different way.
So one of the things, and maybe you could address this, Bob, one of the things we find, and this is a conference on innovation, so I really want to flag this for you. I'm going to flag 2 items for you. Everybody in North Dakota today would say we want innovative and creative students, but there's been no definition put to it. So if it's a vague concept that just has a label, it has no traction. Within our group, Ed Leader 21, and within your regional work, you guys have actually worked with a definition of creativity. Could you talk a little about that? Because I think people might feel that it was more than just this amorphous concept.
Well, as you talked about earlier, I think we have had the opportunity to partner with West Fargo and the Moorhead Public Schools and really talk about how each of our strategic plans are fairly similar. And what we found were those 21st century skills, or the 4 C's. And with that in mind, about 3 to 4 years ago, we came together to say, how can we define for our students and for our staff what it means to be a critical thinker or to collaborate? So we, as a Metro, took the time to truly develop a set of rubric that can be used by the staff, by the students, or even we use it during our staff meetings about how are we doing, and it's clearly defining then what those 4 C's are. I think from there, each of our districts have taken that and modified it slightly to personalize it, but it was on that solid foundation that across all 3 of our districts, we had taken the time to unpack and put into a rubric that defines more clearly for everyone what they mean.
Great. Terrific. I wanted to deal with this issue of self-direction, and I may ask Perry to comment on this. When Valerie Greenhill and I wrote our book, The Leader's Guide to 21st Century Education, we interviewed a CEO at Apple, and he said to us that at Apple, they're at the point now that if people need to be managed, they're no longer employable. And what he meant by that, and this, let me say that again, if somebody needs to be managed, they're no longer employable. And what he meant by that was that the organizations are so flat and the middle management has been so squeezed out that people actually have to know what to do next. And it isn't enough to have a good work ethic and say, tell me what to do and I'll do it. It's you actually have to know what step to take next. And that contrasts dramatically with what I hear in most high schools in the state, which is people, we've heard it at the conference actually all morning. People go, just tell me what to do next, or tell me how to get a good grade. That's not being self-directed. That's asking somebody else to provide the motivation as to what to do and doesn't have you think about the next step. Do you find this issue of self-direction pertinent in North Dakota? Because I do think you probably have some employers that just say, I want them to do what I tell them to do. But more and more, I suspect you do need self-directed people.
Absolutely. Again, it's because of the dynamic of change, right? Things are happening so quickly that people have to be able to respond instantaneously. It's a need. It's out there. It has to happen in today's environment. I mean, it's a global competitive environment, and you have to be able to compete in order to stay alive.
Okay, so we probably have time for a couple of questions, and then I'm going to ask the panel for one last reflection on what piece of advice do you have for the conference from your perspective on how to be innovative, on how North Dakota's school districts ought to move forward. Do we have any questions? Do we have, there is one. I can't see, but there we go.
I have a question about thinking about the transition from student A to student B. How can we as educators be leaders in our schools to design innovative and project-based learning opportunities for our students while still aligning and achieving the mastery of those individual required standards from each of the specific content areas?
Do you want to start? Okay. Yeah.
One of the things that we've attempted to do in the Fargo schools is connect back to our strategic plan where we talk about we want to be a standards-based system. And when we talk about standards, we're not only talking about the content standards, but we're talking about how are they applied within the system of the 4 Cs. So as we develop our project-based learning opportunities for students through the training that we have for our staff, and again, another wonderful thing that we've been able to do as a collaborative with West Fargo and with Moorhead, is build those projects that do start with those critical or essential learning outcomes, and then infuse the appropriate 21st century skills, and along the way, assess both. So we give feedback to students on how they are performing, not only on their essential learning outcomes, but also on the 21st century skills. And then as we continue to do this and get better, and more opportunities are provided to our students, we will begin to fill in all of the gaps so that as a student progresses with us from kindergarten through 12th grade, they'll have multiple opportunities to grow, learn, be assessed, and be given feedback around those pieces.
Are we good on that? There was another question, I think. Yes.
Yes. I'm wondering, how can I communicate more effectively to my building leaders that I'm on board with the 4 Cs. I'm all about it. I've done the research. I am invested in the value of it, but it takes time. It takes classroom time to incorporate that, to model these things, and it's at the expense of content mastery, where sometimes we're told you have to get to this point And my frustration is I can't do both. I cannot effectively do both.
Okay.
So I'm wondering, how do I communicate that effectively?
Wait. But first of all, you can do both. So there are districts all over the country doing both. So you got to get that idea out of your head. People do both if they want to, and this high school is an example of that. And you can go to, so the idea that you can't do both is like, I mean, you may not want to do both, but we could take you to places where both are being done, and then you can decide whether what they're doing is doable. It is possible to do both. Now, I want to grant you that it would be better if the policy climate changed, but I want to make a very clear comment about this, because I worked in policy for 28 years, and I've abandoned it for the moment because I don't see it as a good avenue of short-term transformation. We're lucky. We happen to be at a governor's summit, and there's some policymakers here. But here's the advice I'm going to give both of you. If you're educators, you can't wait for Bismarck to get this right. Just this, you've been given the vision. Student B is what everybody, you hear it, the business community wants it. I'm telling you that this is the best set of competencies for your kids. So as educators, you guys got to move that conversation forward. My guide to you, in our book, we have a 3-question exercise we use for teachers and for parents and for business leaders. First question, what is the change that's occurred in the society over the last 25 years? And they put down 30 or 40 things. Then we ask question 2, what competencies do young people need to address all that change? Which is really what Perry was asking us. And then question 3 is, how intentional and purposeful is your school or district currently about those competencies? And that conversation is the icebreaker. That conversation you can do with your teachers, and that'll create a conversation that says, there's something outside of what we're currently doing that's important. It's these competencies, and we're going to have to start migrating to them. Now, my advice for policymakers is, you're hearing, if you're here, you're hearing a situation in which your own teachers and administrators feel that you haven't created an environment as conducive for student B as you could. I don't think we should wait for you to get there, but if you want an assignment out of the summit, start working on creating and I don't mean a severe accountability environment. I mean a real supportive environment that allows teachers and administrators to head towards student B. You all want to make a comment, though, about, because I do think that the two of you may want to comment about how do you create an environment in which teachers are willing to experiment and where teachers don't feel constrained by producing the student A model?
Yeah, at Northern Cass, we really, I feel like we compete with ourselves, in making, and our vision is to create a class student with, world-class learning opportunities. And so with that, and then creating them not being college ready or career ready, but choice ready. We've talked about that just a little bit earlier today, but to be choice ready. And so in creating that environment, I feel very fortunate that we have a trusting culture, like I mentioned earlier, like a culture of yes. We don't just say yes to everything, but when we're presented, like I said, we've really been, everything that is done is very interconnected. So when our superintendent and principals came to us and said, hey, we want to, this incoming 8th and 9th grade, we're going to do customized learning. They're going to be at their own pace. It was new, but it wasn't just some out-of-the-box type of thing, because we've been building on this. And so I think just having that open communication, a trust, that trust, I know it's thrown around really easily, but we support and we believe in what's happening, and we're seeing results. So that's the big thing, too.
Do you want to make your last comment about this issue, which is how do you create an environment that supports teachers and leaders that want to head towards this transition?
Well, I think as you talked at the very beginning, part of it was as you define what you want that profile of that graduate to be in your own system. And I think through those conversations, student B is going to come out head and shoulders above student A. And as you have that, then you set the compass for your district. The conversations that you can have become much easier because they're grounded in the direction, the mission, and the vision of what you have as a system. And then from there, I think it's continuing in events like this to hear from individuals from industry and elsewhere on what they too see as critical needs for the students that once they leave us. So it's a combination of all of those things, but I think starting with what is your true mission and vision, that profile of that graduate, are critically important.
So Perry and Aiden, maybe you guys could end with a brief final reflection from a business perspective and from a student perspective. What final advice do you have to this summit?
Well, I think a lot of what I've heard over the last couple months is that you build the 3 C's within the content mastery, right? You take that core curriculum and you develop that critical thinking, the communication, the collaboration, and the creativity within it. It can be done, but it's got to be a focus, and you've got to put that strategy forth and move forward with it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think what needs to be done is create an open environment for both teachers and students to push for these 4 C's and find a way to make it easier to wrap their content into these so students are able to get everything they need to succeed.
That seems like a great note on which to end the panel. Thank you.